Good morning, I'm ED-SKaR and I'm back in an actually sunny Milton Keynes. Again at Wargames Workshop at an event run by the Outriders MK, but not just bolt action this time, we are playing bolt action tank war. And I have to admit that I'm not entirely impressed by the rules of tank war. I did read through them, but I'm going to give it a chance. I'm going to see how it plays. The biggest difference between normal bolt action and tank war is not necessarily the rules of the game, but actually the force selector. So instead of having a minimum officer and 2 infantry squads with then 3 or 4 more infantry squads that you can take, you have a minimum command vehicle and then 2 minimum and up to 4 armoured vehicles as well. As the name implies, tank war, you're supposed to take mostly tanks, but you can take armoured cars as well. And so I have brought along my British force, because apparently the British are the only faction that I've got enough tanks to actually play tank war with. I've got 2 Cromwells, a Sherman, and my cartoony Sherman Firefly. But I've also brought along my Daimler armoured car, which is fun because that thing hunts big cats. To fill out the rest of the points, I also have my 17-pounder with the quad artillery tractor, because you need to have a tow for any artillery piece in tank war. And of course the British get the free artillery observer. Any infantry or artillery observer do need to have a transport, so they've got a Bren carrier or universal carrier. And actually, interestingly, I've swapped out the Bren of the universal carrier with an anti-tank rifle, because they're going to be mostly fighting tanks, and while an anti-tank rifle isn't that impressive, it might add a pin here or there and that might be useful. So I'm going to go and see if I can help set up some tables, and let's see how this game runs. For me, my first opponent was the Imperial Japanese Army, which, alongside Italians, do struggle with filling out larger point costs of just vehicles, because they don't have a lot of big vehicle options. In the 1930s, the Japanese were planning for fighting in the mountains of China and the islands of the Pacific, and so big heavy tanks weren't really seen as being all that useful. What that means for a tank war platoon is you fill out your vehicle slots very quickly and have plenty of points for a whole bunch of infantry, which turned out to be a problem for me to face, as I don't have any infantry of my own. In my first turn, I moved all of my vehicles up to cover, which means in the second turn I had to pivot sideways to go around cover, which wasn't ideal as I was facing my squishy side armour to my opponent, who quickly immobilised both of my Cromwells. This is a mistake that I will learn from. My Firefly sat right at the board edge, convincing my opponent to not approach too closely. As scary as that 17-pounder is, it missed pretty much every shot except for the first. And that shot was quite impressive, as it only just scraped a hit by rolling a 4, but rolled so well for penetration that I got 2 dice for damage and scored a double 6, and this is probably the most destroyed tank that I've ever destroyed. My Cromwells weren't having such a good time on the other side of the board. They were mobbed by bamboo fighters with petrol-filled coconuts, led by a single soldier with a dedicated anti-tank weapon that had previously failed. The improvised weapons, however, did the trick. By the end of the game, I was squeezed into this corner. There were 6 objectives on the board, and I held only one of them, so it was a pretty crushing defeat. The second game for me was against an opponent who I've mentioned before, and is certainly my favourite opponent of any of the bolt action players that I've faced. This is the very same one who brought the double officer list a few months back, but today they brought a far more sensible list for tank wars, a Soviet T-34 platoon with a KV and some infantry in support. And the tank war part of this tank war game was over by the end of turn 2. All of the Soviet tanks and all of my vehicles except my Firefly and the tractor all brewed up and burning. And so it became a struggle between my opponent's infantry, who far outnumbered my 3-strong observer team. However, between a good HE hit from the 17-pounder, a burst from the Firefly's machine guns, and a lucky rifle shot, I quickly whittled it all down to just the 3 rifle squad who were sat quite happily in the middle of the board on an objective, going down turn after turn, making them just about impossible to hit. As I said, this opponent is very silly and was chasing down my quad tractor with their truck, neither of which had any weapons, but there was an anti-tank rifle in the truck who had managed to pick up a couple of pins early in the game, and every single turn had failed their order test to get out of the truck. And so they couldn't actually shoot at the quad, so they just followed behind it while the Benny Hill theme played. In the last turn of the game, I made absolutely sure that my opponent was happy for their rifle squad to go to ground again, and I snuck my observer onto an objective. And so at the end of the game, they owned 1 and I had 2, and I had way more kills, allowing me a solid victory. And then they got me food, which is also cool. My just favourite opponent ever. My last game, strangely, was also a T-34 platoon, although this time the later upgunned version with a JS in support. The bigger tanks mean less infantry, and I actually managed to pin out the truck they were in. And that's the first time in nearly a year of playing bolt action that I've actually managed to achieve that. Essentially what this means is that I've given enough pins to that unit that their leadership value is reduced to 0 and they just run away. As a completely unfair trade, one of my Cromwells pushed up and got taken out by the JS, but then, in a rule that everybody else completely ignored in the Tank Wars rulebook, my opponent stole away the wreck of my Cromwell with a recovery tractor. We'd actually spoken about this in advance of the game, and I really wanted them to achieve this feat, but I didn't want to just let them do it, and so I did shoot at the tractor with the 80 rifle on the Unicarrier, which missed. And I'm pretty sure that this is just about the only Tank War rule that we actually used in the entire day, and so I'm happy we managed to achieve at least this. Speaking of shots missing, the remaining vehicles of mine, Sherman's, the 17-pounder in the middle, the Cromwell and Daimler on my left, missed everything, every turn, for more than half the game. 4 or 5 shots for 4 or 5 turns. In all of that, 2 hits, maybe 3, and none of them doing any damage. But similarly, the T-34s were all missing as well. We were joking during the game because the Soviets and Brits are allies. They've kind of realised this, and while Rupert keeps telling them to shoot, they don't actually want to hit their allies. Even when I drove my Daimler right up close and personal, which is its natural habitat after all, it still missed. I'll speak on this later, but the main issue with Tank War is right here. Most commonly, each unit is just a tank shooting 1 shot per turn, and 1 died hit is so very unreliable, rather than 5 from a machine gun or however many rifles from a full squad. Well, all of a sudden, times changed, and we stopped shooting blanks or whatever the problem is with my gunnery, and I killed 4 tanks and the tank riders in 5 shots. Even the anti-tank rifle took out a T-34. Just like that, after more than half of the game trying. Which is crazy, because right at the end of the game, my opponent sat with a single order die, the JS2. Ignoring the centre objective, it was clear that they would just drive off the board in the last turn and score some bonus points, which is one of the mission objectives of this game. As soon as the JS gets its order dice, it's off the board and scores those points. And so it's just a case of what order the dice come out of the bag. Well, I got the first, and my 17-pounder shot, and returned to form, it missed. And I got the second, my remaining Sherman, a hit. No damage, just pins. And another order die for me. My Cromwell drove back across the board, sneaking a shot between some buildings, and naturally missed. At this point, I've just got the Bren carrier, but surely the JS gets its order die now, but nope, another for me. My Bren carrier without a Bren stuck a 55 boys round right into the rear armour of the JS, which did absolutely nothing at all, and the JS drove off, scoring those bonus points. But it did leave me with the centre objective and a lot of points for the wiped out tank. And although they did get the extra point for dragging off the Cromwell, it was a victory for me. And so with 2 victories and a heap of points to boot, I actually did quite well, coming 5th out of 16 players, which I think is proportionally my best ever score. I won some Italian models, which I'll paint up soon, and someone else dumped some order dice on me. They won some in the previous events, but it means I now have 2 full sets, which is pretty handy. Then there's these bits of sprue at the bottom here, because I swapped some parts to get a Piat for my Brits. The games were surprisingly fun, even if I said at the beginning that I probably wouldn't like the tank war rules, and I still think that tanks are the least refined part of bolt action. These games were a lot of fun. And sure, I would like to see some changes that improve the constant single die rolling of the tank's main gun, but that's always going to be unreliable. And there's always little niggles with any rule set that I could complain about, but as a whole, it is a lot of fun. And to you, I remind you all to get some games in, go have fun, and tune in to my next video, which will be some painting. I'm ED-SKaR, always will be, and thank you very much for watching.